G'day guys, some of you out there may be considering buying a new 3DS or a new 3DS XL. Now I know these consoles aren't available everywhere right now, but as I understand, both of these are going to be available in Europe and America as of early 2015. So you're probably doing a bit of research now thinking which one will you pick up. So I thought I'd do a bit of a comparison for you between the two new consoles. And I've also got the original 3DS and the original 3DS XL here just to do a bit of a comparison between all four. And this might help you when you're making your decision about which system is right for you and whether or not the upgrade is right for you. And for 2DS fans out there, I do have my recently acquired transparent blue 2DS here just in case we want to draw some comparisons with this console. So let's get these two systems out of the way for the time being and we'll focus on the main two stars of the show, which is the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. Now the primary difference between the two is obviously the size. You can see here the new 3DS I should say, is much smaller than the new 3DS XL. And just for comparison's sake, they're both reasonably the same thickness. The new 3DS XL is once again a little bit thicker. And there you go, they're both, the new 3DS XL is basically bigger and wider and fatter in all dimensions. And just for comparison's sake, with the original 3DS XL, if I can get this in camera, it is ever so slightly bigger than the original 3DS XL. But I mean, size isn't always a negative thing. Now, I've mentioned this in some of my other videos. I actually find holding the new 3DS, the standard version, I find holding it like this in the cup of my hand, I find that quite uncomfortable very quickly. It creates a lot of strain amongst my fingers. Whereas with the new 3DS XL, the size is actually a benefit. Like holding it like this, it just feels natural and it feels comfortable. And it just has a bigger surface area for you to grip onto and to hold. So I do find using the controls on the new 3DS XL much more comfortable for long-term gameplay. With that said though, as I've mentioned in another video, I hold my 3DS, the standard version, like this, with my pinkies down the bottom here, and I actually find playing like this for extended periods really comfortable anyway. So I suppose it comes down to a decision of what you prefer. And one thing I'll quickly mention is a lot of people have actually mentioned to me that they find the 2DS really comfortable to use. And I must admit, when you're holding it like this, your fingers rest naturally on the main controls here, your forefingers rest on the trigger buttons. It is actually quite a nice system to hold on to. I must admit, I originally did have a 2DS, one of the original black and blue ones, and I played it for about a week or so. And I never did actually get used to the way that it plays. I didn't actually find it that comfortable, but I can see how some people probably would find this setup reasonably comfortable. Of course, the second big difference is the screen size, and there's no getting around it. There is a big difference in both the quality and the color accuracy and the contrast and just the absolute size of these two screens. Now, the new 3DS, just move this one out of the way, the new 3DS has an upgraded screen from the original 3DS. So I don't know the exact specifications in terms of sizes, but I believe the original 3DS had a 3.5 inch screen, or a 3-inch screen, no, 3.5 inch screen, and the new one has a 4-inch screen. So that sounds like quite a big improvement. The new 3DS does indeed look much bigger. And it's actually sort of, this one now is to the point where it's comfortable, it's large enough that it's comfortable to play for extended periods without causing eye strain. I always found that when I played my original 3DS, the screens themselves were small enough that I was constantly having eye strain. However, in saying that the new 3DS screen is really good and it's the larger size is an improvement overall, I do find that the 3DS XL screen being much closer to 5 inches, you can just see the difference here. This screen is much more immersive. Basically, when you put this up in front of your face, at a standard viewing distance, it feels like I'm staring at a widescreen huge TV in my living room. It's that immersive to me. Other things which are probably not that apparent on screen here is, for example, the quality of the screens. Now, I've talked in another video about color temperatures, and I'm not going to go into that in this video, well, hopefully I won't. But one thing I want to talk about is the apparent saturation of the colors. Now, I've looked at only one, it's new 3DS, but I've looked at about 4 or 5 of the new 3DS XLs. All of the new 3DS XLs have consistently had much better contrast over my standard 3DS here. Now, it's not that apparent now, but if I open both of these Pokemon games at the same time, and we get to the screen where you can see the greens of the grass, it should become apparent that the new 3DS is much more vivid than the standard one. Oops. Well, that's not good. So not going to do it for me now. And I can't pause this one. So hopefully this, now that we're not quite at the same level here, but you can see the greens and the blues here are much more richer than they are here. On the standard 3DS, they almost look a bit washed out. I'm not really sure if that's because of manufacturing tolerances and because of manufacturing differences in LCD screens. As I've mentioned in my other video, every LCD screen is going to be different. So it's possible that you might pick up your own standard 3DS and it's nice and rich and vivid. Now let's talk about the 3D itself. The 3D on both of these consoles with that new super stabilized 3D system, it works fantastic on both consoles. I don't have any complaints at all. It's basically, if only the original 3DS had come with this super stable 3D, I think people would have been blown away and this console could have been bigger than it actually is. But nonetheless, I find that these two systems are equivalent in terms of the way they produce 3D effects. They both look quite nice, but once again, the bigger screen size on the 3DS XL means that when you're playing 3D games, everything pops and looks much more visually appealing on this bigger system, purely because of that bigger screen. I'll also quickly make a comment about the sound. I'm not going to turn the sound on because I think that might produce problems with YouTube and DCMA violations, but one thing I'll say is both of these consoles have very loud speakers. I think that the new 3DS XL, the speakers are ever so slightly louder, but you won't be disappointed with the sound performance from either of these consoles. I was blown away with this one just as much as I was blown away with that one. Both of them, to my ears, blow the original 3DS XL and definitely the original 3DS. It blows them out of the water. The sound on these is phenomenal. It makes me actually enjoy playing my games without headphones, and that's the first time I've played a console without headphones for a long time. The sound for me is that good. In fact, the sound on both of these is so loud that when you're actually holding the device and playing, you can feel the vibrations of the sound drivers through the plastic chassis. Like, it's not strong vibrations, but it's basically letting you know that yes, there's actually a little bit of bass and quite a loud amount of volume in these speakers. So they're driving quite a bit of power. So we might look at a few more cosmetic differences between the two systems now. The first thing I'll say is the new 3DS standard version comes with a matte texture to it. It feels fairly rubbery, and some of the faceplates, not all, some of them are gloss and some of them are matte. This one here is a matte textured faceplate, and some of them, as you've probably seen, have wood, and I believe there's some fur ones coming. But overall, this system, I think it doesn't show up fingerprints. It always looks nice when you want to play it. And what I don't like about the 3DS XL is that the system on the top and the bottom is full gloss. And I cleaned this before I started the video, and you can already see here it is just covered in greasy fingerprints, it's never a nice look, and I'm just a bit surprised that Nintendo went with a glossy color choice. What's actually interesting is the original 3DS is glossy as well, and you can sort of see the fingerprints on the top there, but because the top layer on the top here is like a clear gloss, it's really not that obvious. So I think the decision on the original 3DS makes more sense than this console. Because, I mean, this is designed, it's always going to be in your hand and it's going to be portable, it's always going to be, and you're opening and closing the lid, so you're always going to get a degree of fingerprints all over this thing, and you constantly, I mean, if it worries you, you're constantly going to be cleaning it. So I think that, I hope that Nintendo release the new 3DS XL consoles with a more matte finish. For example, if they ever do release a Pokemon themed special edition, such as this Pikachu one, this is a matte finish. I hope they do something similar to this with the new 3DS XL. Other cosmetic differences is, there's not that many, but one thing I'll say is the new styluses in both systems, I really dislike the placement at the front, but more so than that, I dislike the size. So I find them quite difficult to pull out of the front. It's no longer an automatic action out the side here. It's sort of, you have to feel for it and pull it out. And then when you pull it out, for my hands, it just feels too small. I imagine for a lot of kids who are the primary target for these systems, I imagine that the styluses are probably fine. But for me, I just find them just to be too small to be comfortable. So for the first time with a Nintendo console, or at least since the first DS came out, I actually find that I'm not using the stylus anymore. I mean, whether that's a good or bad thing is probably irrelevant. But as I've said in a previous video, I really enjoyed using the stylus in the original DS all the way through to the 3DS XL when they put the stylus back into the right spot, into what I think is the right spot. I mean, even on the 2DS, the stylus pops out the side here, and I mean, look at this. This is the 2DS stylus, and if you look at the new 3DS XL stylus, I mean, look at the difference. I mean, okay, now it doesn't look so big, but the 2DS stylus just feels really, it's just that little bit of extra reach makes it feel nice and comfortable in the hand. And the fact that it's easily accessible from the right hand side, for me as a right-hander, it just makes it much more usable. But anyway, like I said, it's a minor cosmetic difference which is not to my taste. Another cosmetic difference which some of you may or may not be worried about is the hinge design. So each of the 3DS consoles that I have here has a slightly different design of hinge. For example, the new 3DS has a hinge which just stops at the end there. It has one clicking position, and on my console the hinge is actually fairly tight. Like, it's not super tight, but it's tight enough that the lid doesn't wobble when you're playing with the console on its side or on top of you, or you're moving around playing AR games, for example. The top of the lid is reasonably solid. I noticed on the new 3DS, the standard version, the hinge has two click positions, just like the 3DS XL, one at just over 90 degrees and one closer to 180 degrees. And the hinge on this one, it feels tighter than the original 3DS, and it's sort of tight enough that it doesn't move when this console is above your head, or if you're playing with it on its side. I really like the hinge design in the new 3DS. And that sort of leads me to one of my sort of pet peeves with the XL versions of these systems. So my Pikachu XL, just turn that volume off, it has a hinge design where it stops twice, one there and one there. I suppose you could consider that a third stop that they all have. But what I don't like is there's quite a large amount of play in the hinge itself. So whenever you're playing an AR game, or if you're playing with the console above your head or on its side, I do notice that the lid, the top LCD, sort of flops back and forth. And it's a very minor frustration, but I just find it really distracting during gameplay. And I was hoping that they would have redesigned the hinges on the new 3DS XL, but sadly it's the same setup. The hinge on this one, it clicks much more strongly than on the original 3DS XL, but once again, when you put it into the normal viewing position, there's quite a bit of play. And one thing I thought I'd quickly mention is, as I said, I've seen, or at least tried, 4 or 5 of these new 3DS XLs, and they're not all mine, but I've tried them, and I've actually noticed quite a bit of variance in the actual play in the hinge. This one here, it actually has the least amount of play that I've found in the new 3DS XL so far. This hinge actually has less play than my original 3DS XL, so I must admit I've got to be at least happy that it's slightly better than what I'm used to. But it's just, I would have preferred if it was more like a laptop hinge, where you open your laptop lid to a certain viewing position and it doesn't move. It just stays there until you physically move it. But nonetheless, it's only a fairly minor, sort of a minor cosmetic annoyance, because most of the time I play sitting upright, holding the device like this. So there's very unusual situations where the top lid would be in a position where it's flopping back and forth. Another design characteristic on the new consoles which I don't really like is, again, to do with the hinge design. And I'll show you what it is. Essentially, the hinge here moves left and right. If I just be quiet for a moment, you can hear that noise moving left and right. And I'll just do it on the new 3DS XL because it's much more, it's a much bigger movement. So you're probably thinking, what a ridiculous thing to point out. And I mean, I must admit, I thought at first, well, you know, what am I talking about? Am I going OCD crazy here? But the reason why I first noticed is because Nintendo has moved the volume control slider onto the top screen here. And when I'm playing games, I'm constantly, or not constantly, but fairly regularly moving the 3D slider up and down, just as I am adjusting the volume up and down. And what I was noticing was, and this is the reason I first noticed it, because the slider here clicks at the bottom, you have to apply a reasonable amount of pressure to unclick it and push it up. And when I would do that, it would push the top lid to the left, like with an audible, you know, click. And then when I'd adjust the volume, when I push that up, it'd push it back the other way. So I'd sort of notice my console lid would be going back and forth, and I found that really annoying. So I had a look at both of my consoles. I noticed this on both of my consoles. It's less obvious on the standard 3DS XL, but it actually makes a louder noise, and I can feel it through my fingers on the standard 3DS worse than on the big one, even though the 3DS XL, the new one, the movement is much more pronounced. So I went and had a look at my two original 3DSs just to work out, is this something that's always been there? And on the original 3DS, I do have movement left and right. It's pretty much a similar amount to the 3DS, the new 3DS. But on my 3DS XL, I actually don't have any movement left or right at all. So I'd say once again, it's just a manufacturing tolerance issue. I mean, I don't think it's an issue at all. I think it's just that's the way that the hinges are designed. I've seen reports where if Nintendo tightened up the hinges too much, you actually get cracking along this section here. I've actually seen 2DSs with this cracked because the hinges were too tight. So it's a compromise, and it comes down to, does it really negatively impact your gameplay enough that basically the system is unusable? And of course, it's not. The problems are only very minor. It's just one of those OCD related frustrations that when you're playing the game and the top screen is flopping and moving left and right, and you've got different colored LCD screens, all these things in an OCD mind, they build up until you think they're huge issues, and then as you play your games and you forget about it, 3 months later you look back and go, what on earth was I talking about? Anyway, end rant. I'll move on with the comparison. One sort of side note I thought I'd point out, neither of these new systems, in Australia at least, neither of them come with a power adapter. And I find that decision both really bizarre from Nintendo, but I sort of understand it. But as I thought about it a bit more as I've made these videos and talked to a few people, I'm starting to think that the decision was a really poor one on Nintendo's part. And I think at the minimum, they should have included a 3DS USB adapter. I mean, at least this way, with an adapter in the box, I mean, an adapter like this must cost, what, 50 cents to $1 for Nintendo to make or to supply. And at least with a USB adapter, when parents are buying these for their kids and they open them up on their birthday or on Christmas Day, at least they have some way of charging the console from like your phone charger or from a computer. But the way these are presented and the way they're sold in stores is that there's just no charger at all. So I'm assuming that there's going to be some people open these on Christmas Day and they're going to get them out of the box and they're only going to have maybe half an hour of gameplay before they die, and they have to go back to the store and buy a game console. So I think Nintendo could have solved a lot of heartache if they had just included something as basic as a USB to 3DS adapter. So I'm at the end of the comparison now, and I suppose it comes down to which system would I pick. Now, as you can see, I've got quite a few different consoles here. I'm not super rich or anything like that. I just save up my money, and I've been buying these consoles when they're on special. And I now own outright both of these consoles. So for me, it's not a choice of which one do I own. It's a choice of which one am I going to use as my primary console. And at the moment, the standard new 3DS is set up as my primary console. You can see it's got all my different games, and it's got my ambassador certificate and stuff like that. So the reason I set up the new 3DS, the standard version, as my primary console, it comes down to two different factors. The one thing for me is, on the first version of the new 3DS XL that I got, the hinge was very loose and made creaking sounds out of this left corner. And I also had quite a big difference in color temperature in the screens. So that really put me off the system to begin with. So I ended up going with the standard 3DS, the new one, because I had reasonable color temperature accuracy, the hinge was nice and solid, and it felt pretty good in the hands. So I transferred my 3DS XL onto the new 3DS. But now that I've picked up and bought this new 3DS XL for a second time, this one has a slightly better hinge, and the color temperature isn't perfect, but it's good enough. And I must admit, even though I've sort of said the opposite for the last couple of weeks, I'm thinking of moving my console from the standard 3DS onto the 3DS XL and just giving it a go for a couple of weeks, because I mean, Nintendo's either fortunately or rightly so, has now given us the option of being able to transfer back and forth repeatedly as many times as you want, as long as there's a 7-day gap in between the transfer. So what I'm actually thinking of doing is moving my game console from the standard 3DS onto the new 3DS XL and giving this one a go for a couple of weeks, and then when the glow-in-the-dark cover plate that I've purchased arrives, I might transfer back and then use this one for a while. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. I mean, swapping back and forth, but, if it makes you happy, why not? In any case, guys, I'm curious to see what you think of the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. Which one are you looking at buying? I hope this video has helped you maybe lean towards one or the other. I'm very happy with both of these consoles. I think they're very strong consoles from Nintendo, and I just wish that they'd released something like this back when the original 3DS XL launched with that super stable 3D, because there's no denying that super stable 3D is just a killer feature. It's made a lot of my old games, it's sort of given them a fresh breath of life, and I'm playing them in a completely different perspective, because now I'm playing them with 3D on, almost the way they were intended to be played, but now you can play them with 3D on enjoyably without constantly having flicking screens and discomfort in your eyes. In any case, guys, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments or ask me on Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, bye for now.